In this session, I'm going to talk about Michel Barnier. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because he is a particularly unique individual in the current times. When it comes to asking people, who would you consider to be a very good high-profile negotiator, there's not really many individuals that they can name. Perhaps in years gone, people might have remembered the likes of Paddy Ashdown, former leader of the Liberal Democrats, who was a famously good negotiator. He was negotiating Yugoslavia and Serbia, the post-conflicts, and he did an exceptionally good job. So he was recognised for that. But in more recent times, those sorts of individuals are not so obvious. I mean, you can't really name a British politician that had shone with distinction in this regard. Maybe some career servants you can, but they won't be well known. Some people might even name the likes of Donald Trump or Lord Sugar, to pick more populist examples. I'm afraid those individuals are not good negotiators by any real genuine definition. They may be good businessmen. I know that's open to debate, but let's go with that. You may even say that they can broker deals, but they absolutely are not good negotiators. And in the case of Trump, it was particularly obvious when even his own former national security advisor, John Bolton, was extremely scathing of Trump's handling of the negotiations with the North Korean leader. So we know that those aren't examples to follow. So when it comes down to it, and there's lots of European politicians, I must admit, who probably are the good negotiators, but they're not exactly going to be household names. And also, you never see what they do. You don't see how they operate. That's done behind closed doors. So Barnier is absolutely unique in that he has stood out. A lot of what he has done has come into the open, and that provides us with a lot of commentary. As I said, Barnier has been interviewed both by LBC and the BBC Newsnight. I will put links to those two from YouTube in the video description below. I will also put a link to a previous presentation I did on why Brexit failed. I don't intend to rehash that discussion here. I just want to talk about Barnier, the negotiator. Because, as I say, he is unique. He does stand out. And Brexit is for a negotiation professional like me. Brexit is the gift that keeps on giving. And I mean that in the sense that Brexit provides so many examples of how you should not conduct any kind of negotiation. It is a really gold standard in failed negotiation tactics and techniques on the UK side. And I don't say this with regard to any political slant, whether Brexit was a good idea or not. I simply point out that as a professional negotiator, it was conducted extraordinarily badly. And all of that was in the public eye. So in some ways, we've had a masterclass in the worth of negotiation. In contrast with Barnier, we've had a masterclass in how to do it exceptionally well, which he did. And there were a number of extreme challenges that he had to face. He had obviously the political turmoil in the UK at the time to deal with, and this interview covered a little bit of that. In that, Barnier was the only negotiator that remained from start to finish from the entirety of the negotiation process. The UK kept changing lead negotiators all the time due to all the political things that were happening, the way the government was being destabilised. So Barnier stayed all the way through, and he did deliver. And certainly he is recognised within Europe as being the man who conducted a very difficult negotiation with a very difficult group of people to negotiate with. And he did it so extremely successfully. So of course on the back of that, he is now launching his bid to become president of France. And he's just released his book, My Secret Diary, or Brexit My Secret Diary, The Glorious Illusion. So this is why he's here being interviewed. Now, I've highlighted the LBC interview. I will focus on that a bit more because truthfully I was very disappointed by the BBC Newsnight interview. It did not really go into any depth. It wasn't conducted particularly well, to be honest. So you got a lot more detail out of the LBC one, and all credit to Ian Dale for the interviewing style that he adopted, because it really allowed Barnier to explain so many aspects of Brexit that are not always obvious. So I've talked about the fact that he was the only one that was consistent. He's trying to be polite about the political figures that he negotiated against, like Ian Duncan Smith and Dominic Raab and so on. However, in his book, he is quite scathing of them. He did not feel that they were very good in terms of representing British interests. And I think that's one of the lessons, perhaps, the political lessons, that European political leaders are better negotiators because their political systems forces them to be. So Angela Merkel is probably a very good, she's certainly a very, very clever, very efficient political operator. And she has to be a good negotiator to succeed in that environment. In the German system, where you have to build coalitions in order to stay in government. And Angela Merkel has done that for 16 years. So she can't be any slouch to be able to do it. But you don't see any of that, certainly not over here. So Barnier would have grown up in that kind of system, in the French system, in the European system, and I can still talk about growing up politically. So he would understand all the things that are needed to reach compromise, to reach political consensus. And unfortunately, it became extremely obvious that UK political figures, by contrast, simply do not have that understanding. And maybe you can argue they were successful in business or in other ventures, but those are not the same things as negotiating something as hugely complex as Brexit or any kind of trade deal. You need a raft of different behaviours, different approaches, and just a different attitude, a different mentality to how you approach the negotiations. So I think Barnier had that. He had that mentality. He understood what was required, and actually, what he did was deliver the impossible from a European perspective. And this interview focused a little bit on that, some of the skill sets that he deployed, some of the insights that perhaps he can reveal. So I do recommend that anyone watches the LBC one. So perhaps not to bore people to tears, I'm going to let you watch the interviews yourself to get some of the insight. But I'll focus on some of the key bits that I have taken from this from a negotiation perspective. So obviously consistency. Barnier and his team were there all the way through. And that counts for a huge amount, and he admits it. And this gave him an advantage. This is because he could remember all the arguments that were negotiated before. He knew all the problems. He had possibly more than one chance to fix certain problems. He got more than one bite at the cherry, essentially, with all the different political, UK negotiators that were sent his way. So he was all the way through. He saw all the arguments deployed. He developed all the arguments, the counter-arguments against them. That's one of the huge advantages of consistency. And it's a crucial advantage as a negotiator. If you are a deep expert in your subject and you know how to negotiate, that experience does give you an advantage, and there's no way around that. So Barnier definitely had that. Very well organised. This was a massive 4-year negotiation. Huge numbers of teams. Incredibly complicated issue, whether you're delving into fisheries or trade policies or the Northern Ireland Protocol or anything like that. And so you really have to keep track of an awful lot of moving parts. And so that's not something that gets covered a lot. That's a negotiation thing, and not particularly sexy stuff. But it is absolutely crucial. And I think you can see that in the way that Barnier is able to express confidence in what was said and what was agreed and when it was done. Because he was well organised. He remembered all those things. He tracked everything. He has schedules. He even talked about, and this is an interesting little reveal that probably many people don't pick up. He talked about the fact that when meeting UK counterparts, he met them usually about once a month. And that is a very typical cycle when conducting negotiations at government level. That is because you have your meeting, you then go away and you take the documents that result from those meetings and you pass them through all the various departments and lawyers and other experts that need to review them. And you give them, several weeks in which to do that. So this is why big international negotiations can take so long. It's not the time spent around the meeting room that requires so much time. It's the time spent scrutinizing all the details. And that takes a lot of organisation. You've got to track where you are on various different topics. So, and of course, Barnier would have done that. One hopes the UK side, the UK civil servant, did that as well. But obviously they're not here being interviewed. We don't have any insight on that. What we can see, the confidence that Barnier has in the fact that he knew it was complicated and he planned for it. This brings me to the third point, of course, attention to detail. So much detail, and it was very obvious that Barnier was on top of the details on all subjects. It was also painfully obvious that the UK ministers, whoever they were in that particular year, meant to lead in the Brexit negotiations, were not so competent and were certainly not so focused on the detail, sometimes deliberately, and sometimes they just couldn't. They just didn't have the opportunity, they didn't have the time. So, and that's crucial. Attention to detail is what will give you a massive advantage at any negotiation. And to give you one example, in that case, if you want to counter any proposal that someone's made because you don't like it, if you have details, you'll cite facts back at them. You'll say, well, this would cost us, X amount, and this would actually degrade our performance, and this is not in our interest because of all these statistical or other technical types of reasons. If you don't have that factual information to hand, then what people will try and do is go for the emotional arguments. So they might say things like, we don't like it, or we don't think this is fair, or, anything along those lines. And maybe that will work when you're trying to negotiate on a personal level with people but at formal, big government level organisation for the EU, emotions and personality should not matter. And this was a point made by Barnier in his LBC interview, that no matter how frustrated he might get at the behaviours from the UK side, he would try and stay emotionless, try and stay focused on the details, on the task at hand. He even talked about the fact that the way Boris Johnson tried to go over his head straight to other political leaders. And that's the sort of behaviour that can really anger someone when you're meant to be trusted to deal with it. But it didn't look like he did react, and he certainly didn't in the interview. He kept it calm, and he also explained that he had very good communication with the President of the EU, Juncker, all the other EU leaders. And so because of his grasp of detail, they trusted him, and they completely rebuffed Johnson when he tried to go over Barnier's head. That's always a bad tactic, incidentally. Going over the negotiations team's head is something you should only do in exceptional circumstances. If they are well organised, then actually you make the problem so much worse for yourself. So this is another example of a very failed tactic done by the UK. Now the final thing I'm going to talk about here is absolutely the most important and arguably the most incredible thing that Barnier did as a negotiator, and that is stakeholder management. So imagine it, as you will, from Barnier's perspective. He got to negotiate an impossible deal, and believe me, at the time it looked impossible. It still kind of is in a way, to be honest, but I digress. And not only did he have to go through a huge amount of detail on a whole range of complicated topics to reach some kind of impossible agreement, especially when you've got a UK system that couldn't even articulate what they wanted, not in any clear sense, just wanted Brexit. They didn't have much detail beyond that. So Barnier had to unpick all of that. Not only that, he had to make sure that whatever he agreed, he could sell to 26 not very happy countries, in the EU. And that's no easy task. I mean, imagine having 26 bosses that you've got to please. I mean, that's just terrifying. So Barnier recognised this right from the very beginning. And this is one of the good things that the LBC interview focused on. They gave him the opportunity to explain that this was completely unique. And so he had to adopt a very unique approach, which he did. His team briefed all the EU members twice a week. He personally briefed them on how the negotiations were going once a week. I mean, that is a phenomenal rate. That is a huge amount of stakeholder work. And a lot of people just don't want to do that. They don't want to be bothered with that much hassle. But I think this is one of the smartest things about Barnier as the negotiator. He recognised just how crucial that was in order for him to succeed as a negotiator. And by doing that, he completely scuppered the ability of the UK to undermine his position by going over his head or, waffling on about stuff completely irrelevant to these, whatever tactic they wanted to use. Because Barnier put all the other countries on the same page. This is what we negotiated. These are our red lines. These are the pressure points. Everybody sing from the same hymn sheet. And they did. And they stayed in agreement. And I think as well, because they felt so involved, even if they weren't sitting around the table directly, that reduced the number of complaints. You always get people say, well, I'm not happy with that. I don't agree with that. And so I think impressive as it was that Barnier had to negotiate with the UK under very difficult circumstances, even more impressive is that he had to negotiate within the EU as well. And he had to put so much time, so much effort into doing so. And ultimately, this is the most important thing he did. If he had not have done that, he would not have succeeded at the EU negotiator. They would not have secured the deals that they did and got to the place that they are. And the legacy of that can still be seen now. The EU feels very confident in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, in the Northern Ireland Protocol, the Withdrawal Agreement. There is no hesitancy. There is no, compromise really, or anything from the EU, because they are solid. They know where they stand. By contrast, the UK keeps talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol not working, but they cannot provide concrete factual examples that can undermine the EU's argument that there's nothing wrong with the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that actually the EU, and Barnier says this on many occasions in these interviews, the EU is perfectly happy to negotiate additional operational and technical agreement with the UK in order to implement the Northern Ireland Protocol as effectively and as efficiently as possible with minimal disruption. So the EU remain consistent in that position, and they do so because everything Barnier has done to set them up, to put them in that position. So to conclude really, it's whatever Barnier achieves, any political ambition, whether it becomes French president, we shall see. But what is indisputably clear is that in the world today, he stands very much head and shoulders above the average as a negotiator. all these skills that he's deployed, the ability, handled complexity, he's done some incredibly complicated stakeholder management. And these are core staples for negotiation. These are things people don't normally see. But they have seen it in Barnier, which is extremely rare. And I hope many people will look at what he's done, read the book. I've not read the book yet. I'm reading a book by Yanis Varoufakis, who is the former Greek finance minister who stood up to the EU during the Greek debt crisis, but I should talk about that later in another video. Yeah, I'd be interested in reading Barnier's books, but in the meantime, watch this interview, learn from the master himself, because I completely recognize all the techniques and tactics that he has used. They are very familiar to me, but it is abundantly clear that he is very much the master at using them. And he's a great example to look up to for anyone who aspires to be a good negotiator. I hope you found this a useful insight. Please do watch the interview. They're interesting. Read the book. Maybe that'd be good too. And please do put any comments or thoughts in the comment box below.